Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Reich. I represent the Polish Alternative Fuels Association, PSPA, from Poland, as the name suggests. We are here to take part in a discussion panel entitled Global Approaches for EV Infrastructure. So I have today with me distinct speakers. Thank you for being here. We have Nia Palmer, Chief Executive Officer at Terawatt Infrastructure, Boas Weiser, CEO at Chakrtech, Daniel Kohler, Head of Automotive and Mobility at Intralink Group. But what's more important, I think, and more interesting is that you all represent very diverse environments, business environments. We have the Chinese market, the US market, and the Israeli market. And for me, the East Central European market as well. So I think to introduce just shortly, I represent an organization that associates over 140 entities from the region, from Poland. So we have a good observation point to analyze and discuss the market and observe it and accumulate all the data. So for Poland, the approach to the EV infrastructure, to the EV market is it's very unadvanced. It's a very early phase of development for us. We have 20,000 vehicles, a little over 2,500 charging points. So an infancy, I guess, advance rate of the e-mobility market for us. But it's also a good opportunity to learn from others and see the policies that have been implemented successfully, see the efforts of many other markets around the world. And of course, the main goal is to adopt in the biggest quantity possible EVs on the streets, introduce new mobility solutions, really implement and foster sustainable transport. But the differences are not only domestic in our appropriate markets, but also, I think, regional, continental, and global. There are so many discrepancies and differences in approaching this matter. And of course, we were talking at the beginning when discussing the topic of this panel, whether it should be, egg or chicken, whether there are some areas that have more priority than the others, like the EV infrastructure, perhaps incentives for the investment should be of paramount importance in this field. Perhaps we should focus on broadening the EV car park, the EV fleets. And Europe alone suggests that there is no, I think, firm response to this question. There are various approaches, and we've seen approaches like the Norwegian one, a global e-mobility leader, where home charging was the solution and the EV fleet grew expansively. You have countries like Poland, like my own market, where there is no correlation between one and the other, and the policies are diverse, but really it's just two parallel processes. But I wonder what your approach to that is. And I will begin with Boas, with Israel, the global capital for innovation and startups. Do you think if you could, of course, talk a little bit about Chakrtech that you represent, but in your response, could you address that challenge? What are the policies in Israel? Are they focused on one particular area of e-mobility, or are there more wide-scoped? How does the situation look in your market in that regard?
It's a pleasure to be here with you today. A few words about Chakrtech. Chakrtech mission is to accelerate the adoption of electrical vehicles by limiting the range anxiety. I think we are all aware about range anxiety, which is why vehicle owners are not buying vehicles, just being concerned that they will not be able to use the vehicles for trips which are not longer than short range trips. And we believe that in order to eliminate and resolve the range anxiety, you must have a very robust infrastructure allowing fast charging of electrical vehicles anywhere. At Chakrtech, we have developed a very unique energy storage solution based on kinetic energy storage in flywheels. This is a very cost-effective and sustainable solution that allow the boosting of the grid infrastructure to allow a fast charging of vehicles, even in locations where the grid is power constrained. And we believe that this is the key to allow significantly higher penetration of electrical vehicles, and with that, really have the EV owners have no limitations using their vehicles anywhere. So this is what we bring to this market. Just to say from the beginning, Israel is a very small market. You mentioned before that we come here. I think I'm here as we bring innovation to this market, but you know, there is not a lot of range anxiety in Israel because there is not a lot of range in Israel. In any way, we look on the market globally, and we are trying to see how we can really have this unique solution that we have being deployed anywhere from China through Europe, and obviously also in the Americas. Coming back to the challenge is really, we believe the challenge is really the infrastructure, the fast charging infrastructure. It's not enough to have enough chargers. You must have fast chargers. We need to try to get back the vehicle owners, the user experience of fueling their vehicles. They need to charge their vehicles in only a few minutes, and they need to be able to do it anywhere. And the main challenge here is the grid infrastructure, which is not powerful enough to allow fast charging in most of the locations along the roads. In order to upgrade the grid infrastructure, this is really a huge investment it will take decades basically to try and upgrade the significant grid infrastructure that you have in all countries worldwide. And because of that, coming back to what you said, it's really the egg and the chicken problem. There's a huge investment that no one can really see how in the short term can be returned by just the revenues of the charging itself, and because of that, not enough infrastructure in place. And on the other hand, there will not be enough vehicles to allow significantly higher revenues if the infrastructure is not in place. And that's really the egg and the chicken problem. We believe that a lot relies on the government's behavior. We expect to see significant investments of governments in grants and incentives that will allow the deployment, really vast deployment of fast charging infrastructure. We see today that too many countries or governments are are still looking on the short term, having slow chargers being deployed and being subsidized. And we believe that this is not enough. You really need to leave the challenge of the fast charging, even in remote locations, on highways, even in rural areas. And we hope that in the very near future, we will see governments moving to that direction. And this will allow really the significant deployment of fast charging solutions. Once that happened, we believe that vehicles owners, people will have more trust in the infrastructure. They will buy more electrical vehicles. By that, there will be more revenues from this fast charging infrastructure, and this is really is going to build itself from that point onwards.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, you mentioned the subsidies, the incentives, and for example, in the European stage, we observe that sometimes there needs to be a bonus malus, so to say, in Latin, a policy where some good signals, some good ideas are being incentivized, but some are being, put under the fiscal obligation, so to say. For Poland, this is a big, for example, for my market, this is a big issue because we have a lot of imported ICE vehicles, often running on diesel fuel and other fossil fuels. And imposing some kind of environmental fee for that would be a great policy move. And it wouldn't really be related to either developing the fleet or the EV infrastructure. But I guess from Israel, I'd like to move to the sunny morning of San Francisco. Niha, thank you again for being with us. What's your take? What does Terawatt Infrastructure do in e-mobility to boost this dynamic new revolution of new mobility? And what do you think should be the kind of focal point of policy? Should it be incentivizing one particular area to drive the others, or a kind of wider strategic look? What's your take?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Terawatt Infrastructure builds, owns, and finances large-scale EV charging infrastructure for fleets, including medium and heavy-duty vehicles. That's a little bit of a different focus that we have than many other companies, focusing on kind of the higher, larger end of the market for vehicles. We own property assets in 18 states across the US along key highway corridors and in key logistics hubs, and we'll begin development of these properties into large-scale charging hubs over the next few years, as we really see that the inflection point for charging at scale has arrived here in the US. In addition to these assets, we can finance other people's EV charging infrastructure and help them reduce the upfront cost of transitioning their fleets to electric vehicles. And last, we provide expertise in connecting and managing large energy intense loads to the grid. As Boaz said, this is going to be an immense strain on the grid, and we believe that tools like on-site generation, on-site storage, and managing the electricity consumption over the day is going to be a really important part of being able to scale large-scale electric vehicle infrastructure and charging. We're focused on this market because the amount of infrastructure required for the medium and heavy duty market and fleets is immense. It's even more intense than the passenger market. So we see that longer lead times to develop these types of facilities and the cost associated with connecting the loads is a significant effort and cost. And we're here to facilitate that for customers really wanting to make that switch to electric transport. As far as the chicken and the egg and what we're doing here in the US, I think obviously both we need development on the vehicle side to spur that demand that will then spur the charging demand. But if someone's transitioning to large scale, transformation of their fleet or, large scale vehicles, they really want to make sure that the charging is going to be there. And so this challenge is becoming more apparent as more vehicle classes transition to electric transport. Even a small fleet or just a small group of large-scale vehicles could require up to 20 megawatts of power to charge effectively. And this doesn't crop up overnight. It takes months and years of planning, working with the grid operator and owner, building out the infrastructure to charge. And if we wait until there is perfect clarity on the vehicle side, we'll be too late on the charging side to meet the need when the charging at scale is required. Here in the US, we now have sufficient visibility into all types of electric vehicles being delivered en masse over the next 12 to 24 months. We believe that charging needs to be developed now to meet those deliveries of vehicles that will come in the coming years. Knowing that charging will be available is a key component for fleet owners to feel confident in making this transition and taking the delivery of the vehicles. Policies here in the US vary widely across the US. We've had some parts of the US where there's been a lot of local support. And so you've seen more mass adoption of electric vehicles. California, where I'm sitting, has put into place many different programs to incentivize electric vehicles. And that goes everything from economic incentives to other incentives. We were talking at the top of the discussion here about traffic and how people plan their lives around traffic. There's been incentives such as allowing electric vehicles to go into high occupancy vehicle lanes so they have a shorter commute time. All of these types of incentives are very important for the adoption of electric vehicles. We're at a really amazing time here in the US where our current administration is very engaged in helping us think about different ways to accelerate this transition to electric vehicles. And that's happening both on the vehicle and on the charging side. So on the charging side, we're seeing things like coordination of federal highway corridors to make sure that there's easy access to power lines and right-of-ways to actually interconnect these large-scale, energy-intense charging infrastructure. So there are a lot of programs and policies in place. I think the coordination at the federal level and then at the state level will be really important linchpin in making sure that we make this transition here in the US.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. A lot of information, and it's actually true. And then in Europe, this correlation is it's quite difficult to say if it really is so, if these factors really affect each other so much. I mean, you have states where, for Europe, that's a big number. Over 10% of registered vehicles are BEVs, and the infrastructure is not at all at the same level of development, and somehow the market still thrives, the policies still blossom, I can say. So it's a very weird correlation. I guess it depends on the market and the consumers and the behaviors and habits of particular people. But when it comes to people, there is a huge consumer market, an enormous market in China. Daniel, I'm looking at you. What does Intralink Group do? How do you guys support this revolution, as I said before? And how does this look on the Chinese market? Because the numbers are huge, but what are the observable trends? Is it the EV fleet or the infrastructure, maybe another area? What do you think? What are the mega trends on the Chinese market?
Sure. Well, so first of all, Intralink Group, we're a business development consultancy with deep roots in East Asia. We primarily support Western tech firms that are looking to expand into Asia. We're based in the UK and have offices throughout North America, Europe, Israel, Australia. But most of our team are based in our Asian offices in Shanghai, Taipei, Tokyo, and Seoul. And our clients come from a number of industries, but a majority of them are in automotive, biomedical, semiconductor, new energy, and consumer electronics. But I myself head up the company's automotive and mobility business, which currently covers a number of different technology areas, including ADAS, autonomous driving solutions, active safety solutions, battery materials, BMS, and we've also done a number of projects with Western charging solution providers, licensing their technology or creating local partnerships. As for your question, I'm primarily going to focus on the consumer market because government and corporate fleets primarily depend on car park charging solutions, and there have been very strong government policies in place for a long time that have allowed that area to become well established and continue to expand rapidly in China. But in short, I'd have to say that charging infrastructure will become increasingly important, especially for charging BEV access for urban middle-class consumers. But I want to back up a little here because so far there's been ample government support both for charging network operators to expand their consumer networks, as well as for ODMs to develop their consumer BEV offerings. And as was evidenced a couple of weeks ago at the Shanghai Auto Show, OEMs are really pulling out all the stops to demonstrate their BEV credentials. And there's increased evidence that EV growth is becoming less dependent on government support and more becoming dependent on natural consumer demand and growth in that area. So while cost, range, natural customer demand are becoming less of a concern for the mid and low tier BEV market, I think that easy access to charging will start to become a major sticking point in the near future, as compared for the high end market, whose key customer cohorts typically have good access to high end charging solutions. And a major part of the issue for mid and low tier customers is first that they don't have access to charging at home because in urban environments, especially, people do not have access to garage space at home. And secondly, that there does not exist sufficient charging capacity around people work, especially fast charging solutions. So I think it's going to be a major sticking point that will require a number of solutions working in concert to fix here in China. So government solutions will need to better develop public charging infrastructure because, to be honest, most low-end charging stations are not conveniently placed. In addition, greater policy initiatives will be needed for real estate developers to either ensure that new housing developments include sufficient charging infrastructure, or that existing developments become retrofitted in with sufficient either slow charging or fast charging infrastructure. But in addition to this, we'll likely see an expansion of private solutions as well. And this includes not only expansion of private networks like those from TELD or StarCharge, but also greater adoption of solutions like pack swapping stations, which, for example, NEO has begun to implement. The government has been showing increased support for in the last few weeks. But China is going to have to figure out how to coordinate a number of solutions and policies in the next few years to ensure that the natural demand growth continues in the mid to low tier spaces, or in other words, to ensure that typical middle class consumers can easily enjoy the benefits of BEVs. So, in terms of what benefits there are for foreign startups to participate in this, it's definitely going to be for companies who are able to provide fast, easy, robust solutions for infrastructure retrofitting, better fast charging solutions, better BMS solutions to make sure that BEV packs don't go bad after a year of use. But I think that there's going to be definite opportunities for foreign companies to continue to benefit from these trends here in China.
All right, thank you. So a lot is happening, and the consumer market that is so huge is bringing along also a huge amount of opportunity. But there was discussion earlier of the grid efficiency, and I guess with China there's the big question of the energy transition as a part of also pursuing goals related to e-mobility. Do you see that being done simultaneously, or how does it look? Because, for example, in Europe, you have a lot of accusations that e-mobility is still based on fossil fuels because energy is made from fossil fuels. It is a myth that we as PSPA and have to address every day. But China, of course, has a huge challenge of the energy transition. And so what do you think about the grid stability in terms of the EV charging infrastructure and the policies regarding the energy transition, the energy model transition? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's another big sticking point that I've heard a number of both private EEG charging network operators discuss, as well as the major electrical grid operators like State Grid and China Southern, that say that they're going to really have to find government support and solutions for the next couple of years to really make this a possibility. So it's in all honesty, it's not there quite yet, but I think that especially as you see the current 5-year plan start to solidify, that you're going to see real tangible policies put in place to at least upgrade the infrastructure in first and second tier cities. And then, over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then that will be expanded throughout the country.
All right. Thank you. It's very interesting. And when we talk about energy, of course, energy has to be stored. And here I come back to Charkatech. Boaz, did you? I wrote this in an outline to you, as you very well know. Did you discover the holy grail of the energy storage challenge? What do you think about? Because our take here, whether to develop the EV fleet or the EV charging infrastructure, is one question, but really the battery market, the energy storage market, those innovations, I think they constitute a strong third pillar of this road to electromobility. But what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I have to agree as a start and say that I agree with both Nia and Daniel. There is going to be a kind of a mix of solutions. So part of the solutions for this fast charging infrastructure is really hubs, as Nia said in the beginning. And it might be actual upgrade of the grid infrastructure. But in the end, we are really looking on how to do this very quickly, on how to deploy within only a few years to deploy this network of fast charging stations. And we talked about this at the beginning. This is really key to allow the penetration of the electrical vehicles. And here we come with a different approach. We think that in the end we all have the same goal. We would like to have a more sustainable world. So it's very logical to have a vehicle driven by a battery, and because of that, in a moving vehicle, you need to have the storage by a battery. But once you are looking for a solution for a local boosting of the grid, we think it's not logical to use batteries based on chemical, a polluting solution to a sustainable world. So this is a kind of we think a problem that we cause trying to solve another problem. And because of that, we have developed a very unique, as I mentioned before, a very unique energy storage system, not based on lithium-ion batteries like all other energy storage system for this locally boosting of the grid. But we're using flywheels, basically a mechanical way of storing kinetic energy. This is a very robust solution with a lifespan of over 20 years, keeping the reliability of the product for over 200,000 cycles of fast, high-power charge-discharge cycles. And this is a significant step forward when comparing that to batteries. As we all know, batteries degrade quite rapidly in performance. They last for something like only 3,000 cycles. And just to put in mind, if you are just looking on a fast charging station serving only 10 vehicles a day, basically we will need to replace the batteries after something like a year, okay, only a year. And this means that using battery-based energy storage systems to boost the grid really means significant long-term investment and a very high total cost of ownership, just because you need to keep on replacing the batteries just to allow this heavy-duty application of fast charging. So it's not sustainable, it's not cost-effective, and instead of that, we offer a solution. Again, 200,000 cycles, 20 years lifespan, and basically we think that for a stationary energy storage to boost the grids and allow the revolution of electrical vehicles to become a more sustainable world, it's much more logical to use a sustainable method of energy storage, and that can be done with flywheels. This is what we aim to do, and we believe this is going to be this is going to play a key role in this EV revolution.
It appears so. So fingers crossed, definitely. And so these technologies are coming along. We're heading on to probably autonomous driving, V2X technologies, and all this is being strongly present in the United States, especially in California. But Micha, could you address the topic of, how does the federal level, not only of the administration, but also of large corporations, large companies, address the big kind of discrepancy between where California is as a state and the rest of the states are in terms of developing e-mobility? There are huge, vast differences. And I understand there are local policies in place that fuel certain processes and make the progress of e-mobility, of particular areas of e-mobility. But for us, we run an Alternative Fuels Observatory as PSPA, and we observe the United States market as a kind of representation of the world with its differences, with areas that are more developed in terms of e-mobility, others less, but it's still the same grid, the same market. How is it being addressed? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's really interesting. I think at the core of it, any of this will have to be driven by total cost of operation and by other goals that the customers have set. And so you mentioned the corporations. I think in the energy side, I come from a place where we were working on large scale energy installations. That corporate demand for clean energy really drove that market over the last 10 years. And I think we'll see a similar impact on e-mobility. So government policies will be a part of it, but that consumer demand is really another key driver here. So you see large corporations making corporate sustainability commitments, and many of them tied to their electric vehicle fleets and transitioning their combustion engine fleets to electric vehicles. And I think that's going to be a big part of transitioning vehicles and parts of the country where there may be less impetus to do so. So you see, that really is the fleet market right there. And I think that's going to be a big driver for for many, many locations throughout the US. And so you'll see kind of, a chicken and an egg where the corporations are saying, we need this infrastructure, we need the policies in place that promote the infrastructure. And that corporate voice can be very loud and very important. And so we see that that is an important market and an important driver of really pushing governments to act and provide the policies that allow the expansion of electric grids, expansion of siting of electric vehicle charging stations, all of it.
You mentioned the new administration, the Biden-Harris administration. What are some of the policies, the most interesting, I guess, most intricate policies you could name they are now implementing in terms of smart mobility, sustainable transport? Something to learn from, basically, because they're being praised for their policies. But could you mention some of the spotlight, the main points?
Yeah, I think it's the integrated approach. So again, looking at the vehicles and incentives you could have for vehicles, but also thinking about the charging aspect of it. And so you'll see, the Department of Energy pushing forth certain policies on the grid. You'll see the Department of Transportation pushing forth certain policies related to highway corridors. It's that integration across all the various aspects that I think has been really helpful to think about how this really happens at scale. Without that coordination, you might have one portion of the market push forward and ahead of the other before it's ready. And so making sure that electrical grid is getting ready for this large scale of demand. One thing I've seen here in some studies is that the amount of generation required to support a full transition of electric vehicles would require doubling the amount of generation we have in the United States. And so policies that support the increase in clean generation are obviously very important in making sure that we are able to meet the demand for electric vehicles. So I think it's that coordination across various parts of the government that I think are very helpful to this transition.
All right, thank you. All right, that's very interesting. So I guess we can have a final round of short conclusion, kind of where you think the market will be in 5 years, the market that you represent particularly. For Poland, we predict it's going to be 400,000 EVs in our fleet. We'll see if that is accomplished. Daniel, in 5 years, is your market in terms of e-mobility and the approach?
Sure. So, I mean, just looking at where we are right now, we're very well established in terms of electrification of fleets. That includes government fleets, taxi fleets, and increasingly so even, bus fleets and even ride-hailing platform fleets as well. So I think that, in terms of the government and private fleet side of matters, that we're already there right now. So the question is, how fast can we really meet high volume adoption of EV solutions at the consumer level, and not just the high-end consumer level, but like the everyday middle class level. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's the big question, and the fact that we are seeing so many local OEMs really establish their EV credentials, that we're seeing a number of new companies like NIO, Lixiang, WM, who are establishing themselves as new national champions in the smart EV space, and that people are really getting behind these names and these brands. That people are, you can see that people are increasingly willing to accept the risk of BEV ownership, because it's still kind of a black box to a lot of people. But the more and more people get used to it, the more and more that people see the benefits of this, and also the more and more that people push to improve overall access to infrastructure and improved functionality within the cars that they expect to be purchasing. I think that we're going to see this develop quite quickly here in China over the next 5 years.
Thank you. And Boaz, for Israel, in 5 years, the electromobility market, where do you see it?
I really think that in Israel, we are really in the early stage of penetration, but I think it's happening, and we will see more and more. It's not for me to predict the future, but I really think in Israel we will probably follow the trend that you see anywhere the trend in Europe, if you can say Europe in general, you know, many countries are a bit different than each other, but in the end, we have, I think, a very appealing conditions here to really have this adoption of electrical vehicles. Once the electrical vehicles prices are going down, and they are going down, I think we will see more and more penetration of electrical vehicles here. In the end, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but it really goes, the question here, I think it's worldwide. If you ask me what I hope to see in 2025, I think we need to see governments not talking about goals like on 2030 there is this and that percentage of electrical vehicles, because it will not happen. They need to derive the goals and start talking on goals of infrastructure, okay, of saying, okay, in 2025, we would like to have this and that number of fast charging stations, and this is how, those are the investments we are going to do to support that. I really think that if the governments are going to start talking in this kind of terms, we will see the EV numbers they upfront said they would like to see in 2025, 2030, and onwards.
All right, that's yeah, that seems to be the rational way on. And Neha, for you, in 5 years, where do you expect the market to be?
Yeah, I think we are going to be past the inflection point where consumers are demanding this, particularly in the medium and heavy duty market. I think we will see innovation of a scale that we haven't seen before on the charging side, configurations of stations, solutions to grid access and grid upgrades that we haven't anticipated yet, because the demand will be large enough that people will have to figure out alternative ways to get what they need in terms of infrastructure for charging. So I believe that there'll be things we haven't even imagined yet on the infrastructure side as people really race to make this transition, because there's so many other auxiliary benefits to doing so.
All right, well, thank you all. Our time is slowly coming to an end. So thank you very much for your insightful remarks. And obviously, we're all going the same direction. We're aligned. The approach is slightly different, but the goal is still the same. Thank you very much, Neha Palmer. Thank you very much, Boaz Weiser. And thank you very much, Daniel Kohler. I am Alexander Reich. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
And okay, thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.